2, 1. All righty. Welcome to our Mandarin Immersion and Spanish Immersion joint program meeting. And I am so very fortunate to be considered to take over for Dr. Christy Rocha, who is out on maternity leave, and she has been well, and we were informed that she had a beautiful baby girl. So we'll keep everyone posted, and hopefully she'll be kind enough to share some pictures with us and see that beautiful little baby. But I wanted to just let you guys know that we will be continuing our discussion on both immersion programs and looking at the long-term and short-term solutions based on the conversations that we've had previously with regard to space and capacity and overall expansion or consolidation of both programs. So, excuse me, I will go ahead and pull up our agenda. Do you guys mind if I share my screen? Okay. Host disabled participant screen sharing. Oh, so you got to let me share screen.
Okay. All right, well, there it is.
Okay.
Let me see.
Oh, it's still.
Got it.
Got it?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and pull this up for you all. Can everyone see the screen?
Yep.
Okay. So, of course, we're not going to pay attention to the time because we're not following our time schedule. But the first thing on our agenda was to review as veda space requirements. And so prior to this meeting, I had a meeting with I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry. Leticia Salinas, our Associate Superintendent of Instruction, Dr. Christy Rocha, myself, and Carol Diamond. And one of the things that we were able to discuss and determine is that the current academic year, and Carol, please correct me if I'm wrong and if I misspeak, you currently have sufficient space for your 2 kindergarten classes, and there no longer is an immediate need for a additional mobile portable to be brought to your campus because you're able to accommodate the current load as well as the current incoming kindergartners that we originally had talked about.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, for this year, we're good.
For this year, we're good.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to review that. And then in terms of your other requirements, we determined that you will still be okay, but we are, based on my research and also Associate Superintendent Salinas' research, we are not really able to take your computer labs and convert them to classrooms because our ed code requires us to have a minimum amount of certain types of spaces for instruction. And so if we did that, your particular site would not be in compliance. So the conversation that we were having before about potentially taking the computer labs and using them as classroom space, we in essence are going to take that off the table because that's really not something from a programmatic perspective that we would actually be able to accommodate. So that was the outcome of our conversation and research on the space requirements at veda. Do you guys have any questions on that at all? I'm going to take that as a no.
Oh, no, I raised my hand. This is Keith. So just to be clear, when we say this year, we mean the 2021-22 school year?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Correct.
No, the 2020, this year, 2021.
Was that what he just said?
He said 21-20. Did you say 21-22, Keith?
I did, because we're talking about the need for space for the next academic year.
Right.
Okay.
Next year, we don't have enough room
So that's what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't take the portable off the table because we're talking about next year. We know we have this year covered.
and that's part of what we're going to talk about, because remember our last meeting, we had looked at the one, space requirements of the site, space requirements based on ed code, and then overall sort of impact of the site. And so one of the things that we were considering is having the program, have a second site. So as we get through our meeting tonight, you'll be able to understand and get more knowledge as to what we at the district have been looking at and evaluating, looking at programming as well as space, and how potentially we could have a long-term solution for the growth that we're anticipating in both programs.
Okay. Yeah. So just the point clarification was the update was that the current school year didn't need any more space and the portable is getting taken off the table. So just to clarify, because it's actually like two separate items, right? Because we don't need a portable for this year. The school year is currently in flight. So we would
Correct.
only need space for the next year. So the portable was only germane to the next school year.
Correct.
Okay.
And so I was referencing, when I originally spoke of it, I was instructed to provide it for this academic year.
Yeah.
And so now we've taken it off of this academic year
Got it.
because
Okay.
it's no longer relevant for what you guys currently have going on. So
Right.
are there any other questions on the as veda space requirements as we have listed here in the agenda? And unfortunately, I can't see everybody's hand. So if someone raises a hand, please let me know. So the next item on our agenda is the updated spreadsheet with the program load. So I went back based on our conversation last time, and we actually redid. I'm trying to see how I can pull this up. No, I don't want to copy it. I'm sorry, guys. I'm terrible with.
Click on it, Kelly.
I just click on it. Okay, great. So here is the updated capacity report, specifically looking at program versus current load, because we took the max load off because we realized that that wasn't relevant to our conversation. So
Kelly,
now this is the
Kelly,
updated.
Kelly,
Yes.
would you mind just hitting that plus
The
sign?
plus.
Yeah, thanks.
How's that? Is that better? That's even better for me with my computer glasses on. So as you guys can see, the delta between program and current load is much lower than the original when we were looking at max capacity versus current versus program. So if we go down to as veda currently has 36 instructional spaces with a program capacity of 770 with a current load of 629. So technically, if we did our math, and 629, we have 41 spaces, no, 141 spaces available potentially for additional students. And if I remember, Carol, when we did quick math, we said that was equivalent to like 2.5 or 3 more, 2.5 or 3 classes, like for 2 different grades or something.
I think so.
I can't remember.
But that would also be when you think about the number of kids who, or the numbers of children who are not, in the program or in the school filling up those seats. It's partially because 3 of the classrooms are special ed, so they don't actually hold 30 kids. They
Oh,
hold
okay.
12. So their max is, I believe, at 12. One is RSP, so it doesn't actually hold any kids because all the kids belong to the other classrooms. And then my Mandarin Immersion classrooms, other than for the lower grades, the rest of them are not full. So if we had more kids to put in there, then, and we were able to fill it up, because like my 2 6th grade classrooms, I think one has 18 kids and one has 19, although capacity is 30 in each classroom.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so that makes a difference. That definitely makes a difference. And how many sections do you have that are not full in your K through 6 grades? Are they all kind of like that, or?
All of them, Mandarin Immersion from grades, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would say grades 4 and up for sure, because grades 4, 5, and 6 are at capacity at 30 children, but they don't have 30 kids in them. None
I
of the
see.
classrooms do.
Okay,
Yeah.
We'll see that in a later slide as well.
Yeah.
okay,
And Victoria Burbeck also had her hand raised, Tilly.
okay. Victoria, your question?
Thanks.
Or comment?
I just wanted to clarify. So when we say right now, as a veda has enough, this is what we're looking at, is that this current year, you have 629, but it could house up to 4 more sections, which is why this year is fine. But next year's projections were showing that there isn't enough space. Do we know what the 4 additional classrooms are projected to be? As far as how are we taking, where is the 140 student growth coming from this year to next year currently? And I'm only wondering from the perspective that the school board approved last year that this year they would expand to 2 additional kindergarten classrooms. And hopefully Carol can correct me on that. But from my understanding, that was 1 year only. Of course, those 2 kindergarten classrooms will become 2 additional first grade classrooms. But then why isn't there enough space given that you have room for 140 more when those are 2 additional classrooms? So I'm wondering if we already have that.
So there are no empty classrooms at Azaveda. So when we're talking about, and probably when we go to whichever slide it is that Sarah had just mentioned, when we talk about having, we could put another 140 in or whatever the number is, it would only be putting them into the existing classrooms that we have right now. So for example, in my 2 6th grade Mandarin Immersion classrooms, one class has 19 kids in it, and the other class has 18 kids in it. So that's one of the places where if there were more children to put into the program, then that's where we would take some of those kids out, or that's where some of the numbers would be taken out of to reduce that. Does that make sense? So like there's no children to put in it. We don't have any more kids to put into the program. But when you look at this report, they're talking about those classrooms being at capacity at 30. I don't have 60 kids in 6th grade Mandarin Immersion. Does that make sense, Victoria?
Yes, so that makes perfect sense, Carol, in that we have no waiting list, for example, for students who want to join the Mandarin Immersion program at 5th or 6th grade. So that might be a couple dozen empty spots from what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay.
Another issue, Carol, correct me if I'm wrong, but your 2 kindergartens that were added could use 1 classroom because they're only half a day. Next year, you need 2 classrooms to sustain those kids.
Yeah, we haven't even
Because they're
got to
full
next
day.
year yet. Yeah. Next year I will be short 3 classrooms. If we take the children that we have now and move them all up 1 year, I'll be short 3 classrooms, 2 for Mandarin Immersion and 1 for English.
So say that one more time. So 2 for Mandarin and
2
1 for
Mandarin,
your
'cause I will
English
need
only.
2 first grade Mandarin Immersion classrooms next year. So 2 more. So
Mhm.
those would be the 2. Those are my kinders. And then I will need 1 more English only 4th grade classroom, because right now I have 2 3rd grade English only classrooms for the first time in a while, and they're full to the max. And next year, I currently only have 1 4th grade English classroom. So I'm going to need to add another 4th grade English classroom to fit the Azaveda English only 3rd graders.
Okay.
This is Larry, if I may, and then Principal Diamond,
Yeah.
you're going to have to carry that forward for 5th and 6th grade if it doesn't. So I think we can't go to Azaveda to grow the program. We can go to Azaveda if there's one-offs of students,
Mhm.
but we're going to have to find a longer range solution. Would everyone agree that's probably accurate?
I do.
Yeah,
So-
just
Well,
one
sure.
additional comment about the current Azaveda 5th and 6th grade populations being of lower class size. So just holistically, one of the reasons why as parents we pushed for an expansion of the program is to accommodate knowing that there's historical attrition and to maximize the upper grades when the time came. So this isn't talking about where we house it. This is just to keep in mind
Yeah.
that that was one of the reasons why we asked for 4. I mean, we asked for at least 1 additional class, and the district was kind enough to give us 2 extra strands.
Right.
But that's because of optimize the space on the back end on the upper grades.
And if we think about it as kind of going off of what Keith just said, you know, ideally, if we had 4 classrooms for Mandarin Immersion at first grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, then even with that attrition at 4th grade, because the class size does go up, maybe we'd have 3 4th grade Mandarin Immersion classrooms, and they'd be filled up, and we'd be able to fill them up. So that's part of the thinking in that.
Yeah, and so wherever we go, we just need to keep that in mind as we do the calculations, because also with the team teaching between English and Chinese, we have to make sure that wherever we expand to, that
Yeah.
all these scenarios are going to play out.
Yeah.
Are there any other items that you guys would like to take a look at this report? Because this is available for you guys to look at in depth. But I'd like for us to move and then look at the breakdown as it relates specifically to the low enrolled schools and the opportunity that we have for some of the other program issues that we identified. Okay, I'm going to stop my sharing just briefly, and I'm going to go and get this other document. Let's see. So moving on to our next topic, it's low enrolled schools. And so I'm going to go ahead and click on, that's the wrong one, I'm sorry. There it is. And then let me go ahead and share my screen again with you all. Share, and I'm gonna blow this up, so let me know. Can everybody see that pretty well? I can make it a little bit bigger. I can reduce that. Okay. Has everybody had the opportunity? Can they see the screen of the low enrolled? I just need one confirmation because I can't see you guys.
Yes.
Okay. So based on our last conversation, we went back and also updated the low enrolled schools to also match the program capacity to the current load. And so we went through all of the elementary schools and same schools that were identified in the last report. And these are the schools that when we looked initially, had the highest number in terms of the delta between the current load and the program capacity. And so the way you see them identified is from highest number to lowest number. And as you guys can see, excuse me, Warm Springs, Leach, Chadbourne, Brookvale, and Patterson are our top 5 schools that have low enrolled per our initial analysis. And then the school that has the minimum amount of, I guess, low enrolled or at almost a capacity is Millard. As you can see, they only have a delta of 21. And then I did not include the middle schools and high schools because it's not relevant to our conversation right now. But just as you guys can see, there are opportunities to look at potentially having another location to offset the anticipated growth that we are planning on having in the Mandarin program. And as you can see, there's lots of opportunity at Warm Springs, Leach, and Chadbourne, and Brookvale, which are our highest, where they have upwards of 200 students or more that have space right now. And I wanted to open up to see if there's any discussions or comments with what you guys are looking at right now.
Hey, Kelly, this is Keith.
Yes.
Thank you for this. I think in the last meeting, we actually had another view of this that had more than 1 or 2 years out, and there was actually bigger gaps or deltas in certain schools based on whatever was happening in their district.
No, the previous slide that was given to you guys was the current program capacity, and then it actually looked at the maximum load.
No,
But we discovered-
the previous meeting, you actually had a forward-looking view similar to this slide that had actually, you were saying that certain schools were going to have a precipitous drop in enrollment based on whatever factors.
Oh, so that still holds true. So the school that's going to have a major impact and sort of shift is, so the Rick Schlankler program is going to be moving to its own facility. And I believe that is currently housed at Blakeow, and Blakeow will then increase their 163. So you take 163 and add 175 to that. And that would then give us 338 slots that would be available at Blackout. And that would be available when the pre-K program modernization is completed, potentially by next fall. And so, but once again, I'm waiting on, we're currently working with the city of Fremont to get all of our permits and construction and things like that. But barring any major hiccups or anything like that, that site will be modernized and will be available for the program to move into, which would then allow Blakeout to have that large space that would then open up.
Yeah.
And then I believe there's 2 other special day programs at 2 other sites, but I unfortunately, I didn't bring that information with
So
me.
in the link that Shannon just dropped is in the link that we were given. The second page actually has the deltas.
Okay,
So for instance, Blakeow is 587, Leach is 578, and Warm Springs is 563, but it doesn't say which year those become available. And the only reason I'm bringing it up is if we're going through this exercise, let's try to do as forward thinking or forward planning
sure,
as possible.
sure.
So those 3 schools all have 587, 578, and 563. And then Grimmer and Brookville have above 400. And those are the top 5 when you add in whatever's happening in those areas to rebalance.
Well, if you, let's see, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen real quick here and see the link that she's talking about. So once again, this slide that we were looking at is the revision of this one, because this current slide that we're looking at with that has the green band on it, that one was the one we determined was incorrect because it was taking into consideration the max capacity. And the max capacity, once we determined what that included, we had to only look at the program load and the current load, because the max capacity includes special programs and secondary instructional spaces that are not necessarily classrooms that students actually occupy. So the current slide that I was showing you is the correct information. And so these are now reduced to the smaller number that I was just sharing with you guys.
That's fine. Thank you.
So then in that case, using the numbers, so the first slide from before, which we determined is outdated information, had 587 for Blakeow, and now we have it listed as 163 available, I believe is what I saw.
Correct.
And so that's a delta of 424. So, but then, so if we change those numbers and go from what was on the second page of the last set of slides last time, it said that it would change to 755 after the Rick Schlankler program was
right. But once again,
so then in that case, then if we change those numbers using the subtraction, then would it be correct to assume that it might be more like 331 spaces would be available at Blakeow?
And that's exactly what I was just talking about, is the 163 plus the 175 gives us the 338.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So I just wanted, that's what I was trying to make sure that you guys understood, it. The low enrolled updated numbers were the ones that were correct. And the previous presentation, we've corrected it. And this is the most current information, taking out the max capacity. So yes, so you're
But we're
correct.
still
Black
looking
Owl
at
would eventually
in a
have,
couple years.
yeah,
We're still looking at that 163 will go up about twice.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
It'll go up 175 because there's 175 students in the Rick Sklanker program
Okay.
that will then leave the school and then go to their own site, which would then free up those spaces at Blakeout. So,
This is
and that
where-
was something that we had talked about in our discussions with instruction as to how potentially this could help, and understanding that logistically it's pretty close by. It's, I believe, isn't it less than a mile away, or it's not even, I don't even think it's a full mile. I think it's like 0.4 miles away from the current veda site. And so we were thinking strategically, if that truly is the case and there will be sufficient space, then that potentially could be that second site that we were considering. And now the question is, looking at the enrollment, do you guys mind if I stop sharing this, or are you all still looking at it?
No, it's fine.
Okay, that way I can see everybody's face. Now that we can see that there's an opportunity for a second site to actually accommodate the growth, now the question begs, is it worth us having the evaluation done to see how would the division, and it's not really, division is the wrong word, how can we split the program so that it meets the needs K through 6? And is it possible for us to look at just a K through 2 at one site and then 3 through 5 at the other? Because we know our middle schoolers are going to go to the middle schools once all the middle schools are converted. So now that then creates, I think Carol and I, we were talking about it, if we look at our spaces for our 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders and do the shift, that still then would absolutely provide sufficient space for your K1s and 2s at your current site. And then with the opening of the spaces at Blakeout, then that also would be able to fully accommodate the full 4 tracks of 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders at that site, and then have no interruption of instruction.
Would Blakeout be able to accommodate these with the number of classrooms that they would have, the 6th graders, for as long as we need to accommodate them at the elementary level? Are we
We are still evaluating that, but it looks like we probably can.
Okay.
It looks like we probably
Okay.
can.
Yeah,
but
that's
we don't
to
know.
make sure we can do that, because Hopkins won't be open until
2023.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got to accommodate them for another couple of years.
Yeah.
Another thing that comes to my mind, Carol, please add into here anytime, is the ratio of English teachers, because you need to have, well, in the lower grades, if you did K1, 2, you wouldn't need as many English teachers, correct? But they also have the Spanish immersion program there. So they have a number of Spanish teachers. Would there be enough teachers to do your English portion of the Mandarin program?
So,
Initially, at the first helicopter view, it looks like we may be able to accommodate that, but it's going to take a little more analysis and, kind of figuring out, what's going to actually work. Because one of the questions that I had, because I, unfortunately, instruction's not my wheelhouse, so I'm learning from you guys and figuring out how things are done. But I wanted to make sure if we're shifting and creating these sort of cohorts, cohort, when, a certain cohort would be at veda and another cohort would be at Blakeout. do you have to have equal number of teachers for each section? Like, do you have to have an English and a Mandarin, or English and a Spanish for every section of grade that you're representing?
So I could only talk in regard to Mandarin Immersion, but basically the way that it works is that we have two teachers, and May and Katie are both in here. So either of you can jump in if you need to. So we have two teachers, say at first grade. May is in the traditional sense, because this year under COVID restrictions, as things are look a little different this year. But in the traditional sense of how we do the program, we have two first grade Mandarin Immersion teachers. Teacher one is the Chinese teacher for her, like say homeroom room. Teacher two is a Chinese teacher for her homeroom room. And then they swap kids for the, say in this case, 20% of the day, when teacher one teaches group two English and vice versa. So
Oh, okay.
yes, so if that happens for kinder 1, 2, and 3, and then for grades 4, 5, and 6, that is when, say, we have two fourth grade, or Katie's here. So we have two fifth grade Mandarin Immersion classrooms. Katie is my Mandarin speaking teacher who teaches both groups of kids 50% of their day. So she has half the day with group one, half the day with group two. And the second Mandarin Immersion teacher is an English speaking teacher who does the
Okay.
same for the other 50% part of the day. So long answer to the short question, but we do basically have, that's what Keith was mentioning when we start talking about if we get into a 3 instead of 4 upper grade classrooms, it will create somewhat of a hiccup, which is kind of what we went through year 1 and 2 of the program, when we have to get creative, because the kids get 50% of their day in English from an English teacher and 50% of the day in Mandarin from their Mandarin Immersion teacher in
Okay.
Chinese only.
Okay.
So,
Got
but
it.
we can help you with that part.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in thinking
I'm sorry,
about
Kelly.
that,
Sorry,
sure.
Kelly,
No,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
Just on process check, I'm trying to kind of see where we are on the agenda, because I
Oh, I'm
think
sorry.
Trustee Sweeney and I have had our hands up, and I don't think that we moved off of looking at the low enrollment schools, and I wanted a little bit more clarification there
Sure.
before we get into the projection piece.
No worries.
Okay, so I'm just kind of piggybacking on a couple of Keith's questions. So I think I'm understanding that we need to kind of blend together. And I think Shannon already described kind of the subtraction, and you verified that a couple of pieces we could add to these new numbers now that you have program capacity. My other clarification, something that we had talked about before, is that we could pull out, to get a more accurate count of what the load actually is of neighborhood students, we could take out the students, for example, at Azaveda, at Blaco, those sites that are special education, which is a district program, because those students could be moved per the district program, because we put students where there's space. And if we were instead going to move, whereas we absolutely have taken the stand that we would not displace neighborhood children from their neighborhood school, if we have another district program, then that perhaps could be moved to a different elementary school. So my question is, how might we see at Azaveda, they have however many classrooms that currently are being taken for special education students, and might that free up X number of classrooms? And would we be able to see that for all of these as well? Or was that already done somewhere else? And then secondly, let's take, like, for Judy's school, the current load, does it continue to include both special education load and the Spanish dual immersion load? Because then we wouldn't, when we go to look at expanding capacity for the dual immersion for Spanish, Judy wouldn't have to absorb the entire load. We already know that part of that's accounted for. So I think that I just only speaking personally, I really am interested in seeing that multi-year all in one chart. And then further out, say Chadbourne, we would know that there would be a drop once Hopkins is a middle school. But I think that even just seeing the next 3 years, but all in one chart, is going to help us make kind of long-term decisions.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking, because I think I do, but I want to make sure. So one is program capacity and pulling out your special day classes and your special district classes. And I want to make sure when you say a district program, give me sort of an example what that means, because I'm not sure I understand when you say district program. Is it like the pre-Ks or the daycares or things like that, or?
So pre-K is an example. However, I know Dr. Rocha could talk a lot about this if she wasn't on maternity, but there's something special that has to happen for pre-K and getting that approval. So from what I've heard, current sites that have pre-K programs, they're not easily transitioned facility-wise in order to become a classroom for pre-K. So it's not easy to move pre-K.
Okay.
So unless you hear otherwise, I think but yes, that would be an example. I would say my son, we're in the Niles attendance area, but because I applied to have him in the Spanish dual immersion, he went to Vallejo Mill, which means for me as a parent, I prioritized being in that district program over him being in a neighborhood school.
Gotcha.
So that's, and same thing with special needs students. They need their free and appropriate education, but that puts them in a district program for a special education classroom that's most appropriate for them. That might not necessarily be their neighborhood school. And so those are moved from site to site. And if we know that those things are movable and we could see that, it would actually create larger deltas than I think what we're seeing here.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And I didn't think to drill down to that level, but that makes perfect sense now that you've explained it to me that way. So I don't have an answer to the question, but I will get an answer for you and get that information and compile it. And then you wanted a 3-year projection, neighborhood school versus program, district program, and then the special ed, special needs, and other pulled out as well. And then we can really see what it is each site is looking at. Okay, got it.
Kelly, can you, I'm sure you probably would do this, but check with special ed because there are some requirements. And I'm not sure if any school has enough space, like Grimmer has 4 classes. Carol, I think you have 3 or 4, right? So where would they go?
I have 3.
Yeah.
I have 3 that goes TK to grade 5.
Yeah, and I have
They
K.
they stay at my school their entire schooling.
I'm pretty sure no school can take more than 20% of their capacity. So check with special ed on that.
Okay. And you said that there was someone else. Unfortunately, I can't see when people raise their hands when I was sharing the screen. So please let me know who else had a question.
That was Larry.
Trustee Sweeney is very shy, Kelly, so you have to wait for him to be called on.
Okay.
The only person shyer than me is President Berbick Herrera. So we have I'll make my remarks really quick because I think they're very important. With special ed, those kids need a routine, and I think it would be very, very difficult for us to displace them. Just as food for thought. I'm not saying that should be taken off the table. And the other thing is, if let's just say that the classroom size was 30 kids, and a school had 300 spaces available, that does not mean they have 10 classrooms available. So we have to really look at how that whole thing works, to how many classrooms could we get, because as President Berbick said, we don't want to displace any of the neighborhood kids. So it just gets more and more complicated, but I just wanted to throw those for your consideration as we're moving forward.
Thank you. I'm glad to, because as I said, I don't think in the same terms as you instructional folks do. So it's helpful to me to kind of have these discussions and know the things that we have to actually look out for when you start moving the numbers around. Okay. On the capacity issues, are there any other questions on the capacity spreadsheet that we went through? Because I don't want to move on without making sure that we've addressed everything. Okay. So just for a recap on that particular item, I'm going to follow up with instruction. We're going to look at a multi-year review of the top 5 schools that we're considering. Look at the neighborhood schools versus the Mandarin and Spanish immersion program kids and see what those breakouts are. Look at our special ed, look at what the percent capacity is and where those students are actually located. And then also look at the district programs and where they're located and what their capacities are, so that we can look at everything kind of all together and then figure out how we kind of play shuffleboard, right? Okay. So good. I'm glad I heard clearly what you guys were looking for. Okay. So going back to the agenda, let me see here. The other thing that we had also that you all had requested was the updated overload list. And one of the things that was brought up last meeting, there were a couple of errors that were identified, and we were able to work through and clarify those. So I'll share my screen with you guys. And let me make it a little bit bigger. And please let me know if you guys can see this clearly. So this is our current overload for last year and this year. So if you look at the first column, you can see it says elementary, and then it's listed, by attendance area. Oh, excuse me again. And as you can see, for our school year of 1920, which is past, you could see at Ardenwood had no incoming students, but they sent out 26 students. And so for the school year of 2021, they also had no incoming students that were overloaded, but they did send out additional 35 students to another school. And one of the things that Dr. Rocha had asked student services to help us with is to find out where these students were sent to. So, because right now we just know there was 35 that were sent out, but where were they sent out to? Were they sent out to neighboring schools? Were they sent out to, services outside the district because they were students that needed special services that the district doesn't provide? So we're in the process of actually trying to break these numbers down even further. But this is a snapshot for you all to see the schools that are being impacted and how they're being impacted, whether they're receiving students or whether they're sending students to, outside from their home school. So let's see. So here, if we look at as veda, I'm just going to highlight it here. It shows that in 2019 and 2020, there were 11 students that were brought in and 19 students that were sent out. In this particular year, there are 4 students that have been brought in and 16 students that have been sent out. Once again, I have no idea what the reason was for the transfer, but we've asked them to kind of decipher that for us so that we know what's going on. And as you guys can see here, where is it? So Blake Owl only had, I'm not even going to look at last year's. So for this school year, 2020-21, they had 11 students that transferred in, and they had room, but they only sent 2 students out. And in talking with Dr. Rocha, she was saying, since the number is so low, it's probably parents who said, hey, I want my kid to go to a particular program, or they may have had a special circumstance where they just had to be sent away, so away from their home school. But this is also another indicator to see that that particular site does have the ability to receive students and not be impacted in a negative way. there was another school that you guys had mentioned. Was it Vallejo Mill or, yeah. So here, if we look at Vallejo Mill in the Washington attendance area, this particular year, they received 18 students incoming and they sent 28 students away. And then if you look at Parkmont is just ridiculously overloaded. They, of course, have 0 in the students that they've received, but they had to send away 149 students to other school sites because they were at full capacity. So this is just a good sort of tool for you guys to see kind of which schools are being impacted and which ones are still have the ability to receive students. So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to look at this. Are there any questions on this particular information that we're looking at?
Yeah, Kelly, just even though it's not a district program, overloading is also something that we do district-wide. So when we look at the number that we're taking in, for example, Grimmer with 48, are those 48 students that Grimmer took in counting as their current load? Because those 48 could have been overloaded to another nearby school. So we want to, again, show that even obviously they're serving all of those students, but for our purposes, it's done district-wide, and that would actually be able to show, again, a larger delta, because any overload students coming in, that school, if it became an open site for an immersion program, they would instead just overload somewhere else.
So I want to make sure I understand. So your question is, are the 48 students counted in the current capacity of the site, or are they counted at their home school and then overloaded to another school and then not counted?
I can tell you that they're counted in the current capacity.
Okay,
Correct. Yes, that's correct.
okay. At the school that they're attending, not at their home school.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. So we would actually want 3 lines, for example, taken out of Grimmer. We would want the immersion program, the number that is out of their current load. We want overload students taken out from their current load, and we would want special education program students taking out of their current load, because that would be the maximum delta for that school, if that makes sense.
Well, why would you take the overload students out if they're already being counted as the current enrolled student for that year?
You would only be able to take them out for future projections, because once they're
Okay.
in, they can't be moved anywhere else.
I see. Okay. I didn't know that. That's very good to know. Okay. So immersion, overload, and then what was the third one, Victoria? You said
If we phase out a special education district program from that site, then yeah.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
I just had one question. I don't know if this is the
Sure.
appropriate time to ask, but most of the schools in Fremont are TK to 5 or K to 5 or 6 for some of them. But is Leech and Warm Springs, they are split up, correct?
That is a question that I would have to get back to you on because I don't really know.
That's correct.
It is.
Leech goes up to 2nd grade and Warm Springs starts at 3rd.
Okay. So
And
they
Warm-
already have that split track. Do any other schools have that, or is it just those 2 in Fremont?
just those 2.
Those two.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
And it hasn't been explicit, but is that the expansion model we're looking at for the MIP program?
It's one of them
Okay.
that we're looking at considering. The goal is to, one, create the least impact to the program in terms of disruption of instruction. And then 2, we're trying to honor the request that the parents made of wanting to stay at veda and to stay within their local community. So that's why we're looking at these options to try and make sure that we address and honor that as much as possible. So that you're not like in a whole different attendance area for the second, for the second cohort. And maybe
When we
that's the
talk-
wrong.
well, that was a question I had. When we talk about second cohort, I mean, because it can be, so like, for instance, if you have one child in K through 3rd and another child in 4th through 6th, and there are 2 different schools, the logistics of dropping them both off will be challenging. So is that considered a cohort, or are we actually thinking of parallel tracks K through 5 or K through 6 at both schools?
That's open for discussion. But for our initial sort of deep dive and discussion that we had, we were just looking at doing very similar to what Leash and Warm Springs is doing, where you have a K2 and then a 3 through 6.
For the
And-
entire program?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And that way you're able to physically accommodate growth in either group without disrupting instruction. And then you still, from a social and educational perspective, the same kids are still going to be together, as they were at one site, then to another site. So there's minimal disruption, and I forgot what the terminology is, but their emotional well-being and their social development is not going to be impacted because they'll still be with their friends and the students that they're accustomed to learning with. Are there any other questions on the overload report? And I can move on down the list because I just noticed our time. Okay, so looking at our agenda, I'm sorry about that. Let me go back over here. I've got too many tabs open, and I get just turned around. So the next slide that we're going to look at is the SID and MIP capacity, report. Let's see. So it looks like I only have the Spanish dual immersion. I don't have the Mandarin immersion program. But let's go ahead and take a look at that.
Should be 2 slides there, Kelly. Second.
Oh, got it. Okay. I'm sorry. My non-technology self is not always seeing what's right in front of me sometimes. So my apologies. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. And then share. So what we have here, let me go ahead and, how do I make this bigger? Let's see.
You can go up to present up in the upper right-hand corner.
Oh, you guys are, there it is. Okay, got it. Okay, great. Now I'm going to move my little square down to the corner here out of the way. So here in looking at, I'm going to see if I can move this too. This is in our way. There we go. Okay. So looking at the Spanish dual immersion program, this shows us K through 6. Here is our current numbers totaling 396, looking at all grade levels. And then the current number of classes per grade. And then here in the current potential capacity, we see it growing from 396 to 594. And then the last column that's shown is the delta between each grade. And I don't really understand what the higher delta is in the upper grades, but I was hoping that maybe you all could maybe explain to me what that means.
It's just attrition, Kelly. It's in the upper grades, we lose students and they have to test into the program being proficient at the grade level they want to enter in both English and Spanish.
I see.
And I'm
Okay.
sure it's the same in Mandarin.
Okay,
So once we lose students, we aren't able to replace them.
gotcha. Okay. So here is the Spanish. Are there any questions before I move to the Mandarin Immersion program slide? But as you can see, the Spanish program is going to grow pretty significantly over, and I believe this was over 2 academic calendar years. Please.
This represents the actual enrollment numbers right now.
Okay,
So
okay,
this is available space if we had students that were able to test into the program and be placed in the program currently.
okay. Gotcha.
The other piece to that, because we did work on this previously, is that if the Spanish dual immersion program was at one site, you could actually see some of these grades could be housed within 2 classrooms.
Correct.
But for example, Judy isn't turning away a class of 21 and all of a sudden collapsing that, right, for those students. But if you have 57 kids over 3 different schools, that's going to necessitate 3 different classrooms. So
Gotcha.
we had looked at the need when we were trying to identify a school. It was actually only for the current and not for growth. It was less than 21 needed. And then I'm not sure if Sarah or Judy might know if there's currently any sort of waiting list at any grade, but I don't believe so for SDI.
There is not.
Okay. Okay.
Right. So in this scenario, theoretically, if there were in a unification, we wouldn't need to have 3 classes at grades 4, 5, or 6.
And is that because your capacity for those grades is 30 students? And so you would then consolidate to make 30 students in each classroom?
And only need 2 classes, yes.
Okay. Okay. I understand now.
And even though obviously we now merging to look at all dual immersion for both Mandarin and Spanish, part of what we had talked about in the Spanish dual immersion program is actually doing the reunification, which was the primary goal, will free up more classrooms district-wide. So that will in turn help the Mandarin immersion program as well.
Okay. Okay. Well, if there's no other questions on this particular Spanish immersion program, let's go ahead and take a look at the Mandarin immersion numbers. And as you guys can see here, oops, sorry about that. Didn't mean to click out. As you all can see, here's K through 6. Current number is at 369 of currently enrolled students. There's currently 16 sections of K through 6 classes. And then potential capacity goes from 369 to 444. And I guess the same holds true here in the Delta as there is higher attrition at the upper grades. And so that's why you see an increase in number. And my question is that the 3rd grade, is 3rd grade the transition point for the language program? Or is that just sort of a point that parents transition to something else?
I don't know necessarily why that number jumped. The age that or the grade level we begin to assess students in both languages actually to make sure that there's English proficiency and grade 2 proficiency would be the 2nd grade.
Okay.
At what point do we increase the 1st through 6th grade classes beyond 2?
So I don't know if I understand the question, Keith.
Well, I didn't understand if the previous slide on the Spanish immersion was showing the potential maximum capacity, because when I look at the Mandarin immersion program, it says grade level K, there's 89 current number of students and current number of classes. Is there another slide that shows the projected with when all 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th have between 3 and 4 classes added on the upper
No,
grade?
we don't have that right now.
Okay, because that would significantly increase the student count on the Mandarin immersion program.
Yes, it will over time. Absolutely.
Okay, so back to the Spanish immersion slide, that is
Sure.
569 is the current near-term projection.
So 396 is their current and the 594 is the potential capacity.
Right. So if all of this SDI classes were full right now, that's what we could fill it to. That's what it would be filled to. Because we have 1 class at each grade level at each of the 3 strands.
I see, because it's assuming that each of the 3 strands are fully
correct.
And that's once the new facility comes online, that's the carryover assumption as well.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So kindergartners, you're limited to 20 or 24 students.
24.
24. And then 1 through 3 is 28.
28. Mhm.
And then 4, 5, and 6 are 30.
30.
Okay.
For now.
That's why we got the breakdown of the numbers the way that they are. Okay, got it.
The only point I'm making is that if you just extrapolate the full program potential for the Mandarin Immersion program, that's going to be a combination of, 4 classes, let's say up till 3rd or 4th grade, and 3 classes in 4th, 5th, or 6th, right? It's going to make that number probably in the 700 range.
That's likely to be true over time, yes.
Okay.
Well, I'm just saying again, like we're both talking about the same starting point as current number of students in Spanish and current number of students in Mandarin are very similar right now, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So yes, it actually they're almost spot on. So one is 396 in Spanish and Mandarin has 369. So it's basically one classroom difference roughly from what the current enrollment is. It's just that in looking at the number of classes, the Mandarin has fewer sections than the Spanish immersion program has currently. So,
Yes.
And that would be because we're all at one school.
right,
Yeah.
right. All right. So are there any other questions on these 2 particular slides before I stop sharing my screen?
This is only because I'm not familiar with it. When, let's say when Marshall was a proposed school for Spanish dual immersion, was the assumption that all 3 classes were going to continue on, or were they going to consolidate?
They were the assumption, as Victoria just mentioned, is that they were going to consolidate.
So there was that 2 classes?
There was also there were also going to be the ability to add kindergarten classes, so that it was a similar situation that over time they would have an opportunity to grow the number of students.
Okay. I mean, you see how it's hard to compare, right? Because there's different situations. But all I was trying to get at is, right now each program has a similar number set of students, and then extrapolate out the maximum load for whatever the programs look like. The differential between students, are they going to be the same or different between Spanish and the Mandarin Immersion program?
That's a very good question. And I think there are different nuances to each program that make each of their situations different, that then make it difficult to do a comparison. But just from nuts and bolts of class size and number of students and teachers, that's a fair comparison. But I think there's a lot of sort of, when you dig down into the details, there's a lot more things that make them different and unique and have different needs based on those unique factors for each one. So, but that's a good discussion.
I think the SDI parents hoped that through unification and having a stronger program, that it would attract more students and they would stay in the program as well. So I mean, I think it's fair to look at the differences in the numbers as they exist right now, but I think, obviously the goal for the parents in each of the programs is that they have a strong program.
Okay.
There's a hand.
I was going to say, I see a hand raised.
No.
Hi. I echo what Sarah just mentioned, but I did have a question. In consolidating and the Spanish dual immersion, looking at the current potential capacity, consolidating classes would apply for 4th, 5th, and 6th, but not kinder to 3rd grade, correct? Because then you're exceeding a 30.
Or 28 to 1, yeah.
Yeah, 28 to 1. Okay. So, but at the same time, we're not necessarily looking at the delta as a sign of the number of classes, correct? Like, it's pretty much obsolete for kinder to 3rd. You see what I'm saying? So, I mean, what's the point of the delta on the Spanish dual immersion showing it?
Just looking at the spaces available.
Okay.
Looking at the spaces available if all the classes were full.
Okay, but there's a ripple effect to that, so it doesn't necessarily coincide with the number of classes. So the fact that you're able to accommodate it on 1 grade doesn't necessarily mean with 2 classrooms doesn't mean that it would apply to when they roll over to first, second, third, fourth with their sixth, correct?
I think I understand. And yes, I think that the answer is yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And the numbers also showed the availability to grow. I mean, if we
Yeah.
had more kindergarten students coming in, we could maintain the program for longer.
Okay. Very good questions. I'm just writing this down. Sorry.
On the Mandarin Immersion program, I had two questions. One, is there any existing waiting list? And two, and maybe this is for Carol, the kinder, that asterisk, were we short English only students, or were we short students that were Mandarin proficient?
I can pull up the waiting list right now. There is a waiting list for first and second grade, and I will tell you whether it is English only or bilingual. That is, but I need to pull it up. I don't have it memorized.
Yeah, Sarah has that information, but Victoria, you're right on. It's one or the other.
Yeah. And that has been a conversation that has been around for a long time about making sure that when we fill them, that they're 50-50. So if we don't have enough, then we do hold them there until space becomes available.
Okay.
So
The other question that I had too, do we limit the amount of classes based on the number of instructors that we have available to meet those needs of those classes?
I don't believe historically we've done that. We expanded the program and then found the teachers.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Correct.
So actually the wait list is for bilingual or native speakers. So that we placed all of the English only students.
So part of the expansion, since that is a primary goal for the Mandarin dual immersion, of expanding, part of that expansion can be advertising, right? Because some of those students for first and second, and is it correct that you would accept first graders as a first year, but is that the last year? Or
Right.
do you only accept them at kinder?
We accept first and second.
Mm-hmm.
And they're currently
even at second. So in English only.
Kindergarten first, Victoria, I apologize. Kindergarten and first. Second grade, we do primary language assessment, and we also assess English proficiency. So they need to have grade level proficiency, both English and the target language. And there are currently on the first grade, 51 students.
And they're all Mandarin proficient.
No, not for the first grade waiting list. For the first grade, it's about 50-50. And for second grade, there are 12 plus 10, 22. And again, it's about 50-50. 50 English only, 50 bilingual.
So why, if we have 2 more spots at first grade, wouldn't we have accepted 1 and 1?
So that is a good question in the sense that if we haven't, I mean, I obviously have this information now, but it's what we need to basically poke student support services to place the students. So we need, because there is a wait list. So yes, those positions need to be filled. So.
Yeah, my only concern is if we don't fill it this year, we've lost those students essentially, right? So in addition to normal attrition, it's highly, well, actually not it's highly, like it's completely impossible to fill afterwards because there would by definition be no third grade English only student, whereas we could have Mandarin, right? So if there's a wait list at third grade because of the proportionality, then it would never get filled. Is that correct?
No, actually, there are so many Chinese language schools and after school tutoring programs. A lot of people have very strong interest in going to the Mandarin program. So we often advise the parents to keep up with the Chinese if they're interested in continuing the program, which is an advantage to the Mandarin program over Spanish because there aren't a lot of Spanish language schools in the community. But Yes,
The
you're
student doesn't have to be English only. They just have to be English first language in order to fill that demographic for the ratio.
So the ratio, we fill it in kindergarten at that ratio, and we do our best to maintain it through kindergarten, like through first and second grade. But once we exhaust the wait list, we do fill it, we fill available spaces. We also get the increase in class size by that time. So usually by the time third grade comes, there are enough available spaces. And not only that, the students have been in the 90-10, 80-20 model for long enough that, they're, as long as they can demonstrate proficiency in both languages, then they'll continue their education at that point. Whereas, we in the 50-50 model in kindergarten, we really, the modeling of English for Chinese speaking students and the Chinese for the English speaking EO students is really important.
Okay.
So, but I will make sure to follow up with student support services to fill those positions. And there have been a number of drops this year because of the distance learning, but I mean, that's a separate conversation, but we're going to have to keep up with it a little bit.
Okay. Well, I wanted us to keep moving on through our agenda. We're running a little short on time, but I did want us to make sure. Do you guys want to extend our time just a few minutes past 7:30 to get through the rest of the things on our agenda?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we'll just extend it an extra 10 minutes. The other thing that is on our, before I move on, are there any other questions on the slides that we've just reviewed, and any more comments or discussion points that you guys wanted to have with regard to those numbers for both programs? Okay. Well, next on our agenda is the Lila Bringhurst update. I know the last time that we met, I wasn't able to provide any significant information for you all because the district had not formally received the school. The board was gracious enough to accept the project last month, and we are now still in the process of closing that transition of taking ownership of Lila Bringhurst right now. We're hoping that we'll have full possession of the site by the end of the year, but I'm crossing my fingers and my toes because it's been a difficult journey in us getting there. But we're one step closer to actually having that school be available online. One of the things that you guys had asked about was to actually know what Lila Bringhurst capacity was, and so I have prepared a slide for you guys to see that I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, that we have Lila Bringhurst has a capacity of 1,200 students. We do have an obligation to the developer to have a certain amount of spaces available for those students to, actually attend that site, but we are not obligated to necessarily assign them to Lila Bringhurst, but we do have to accommodate whatever numbers within our 1,200 to have available for homeschooled kids that come from those developments. As of Friday of last week, we only have 85 students that have registered for Lila Bringhurst Elementary. And of course, that is way below what the anticipation was when we first agreed to go ahead and build the new school and anticipate and grow to the capacity of 1,200. So that now allows for us to look at Lila Bringhurst as an opportunity to, one, use the school as one of the immersion sites, but also provide an opportunity to also expand, and consolidate the Spanish program or the Mandarin Immersion program all in one location. Because looking at our projections that we've received from the city as well as the developer, it's going to be probably 5 years before we see any significant numbers, like 200-300 students that are going to be coming from those developments. So that is an opportunity for us that whatever students we place at Bringhurst, if we just look at K through 5, they have the opportunity to actually stay at that site the whole time and not have any displacement of neighborhood kids or students that bump them because they're transitioned from another location. So, but what we have here is we have a TK, K, and 1 through 5. And there's counseling, SDC, teacher workrooms as well at this location. There are 2 TK classrooms. There are 7 kindergarten spaces, and then there are 6 1 through 5 spaces, as well as 6 support rooms that are available for additional support of instruction. So this is another option for us to look at and evaluate and consider as an opportunity for either program to be able to be consolidated in one location. And one of the things that, of course, Bringhurst does pose a challenge is and before I stop sharing my screen, does everybody have any questions before I stop sharing? Okay.
Yeah, I'm wondering just if you could speak directly, because this has come up quite a bit. One, how many years out per the arrangement with the district are we obligated? There was previously like a percentage that we had to keep exclusively for neighborhood students, and it was stated that we weren't even allowed to open if it wasn't primarily for Bringhurst homeschool students. Has that changed? And then
that was incorrect information that was provided to you guys. Our conveyance agreement that we have with the developers does not have that language in it that has any restrictions. What it does have in it, it states that we initially, when we take ownership of the school, the developers had asked to set aside, I believe it's 469 slots for neighborhood kids, but there's no mandate or restriction placed on that agreement, because once we take full ownership of the site, we in essence are in control of it. And Trustee Sweeney, please correct me, because I know that you were part of that discussion with the developer. We are not obligated to place those developer kids at that school. They just have to be assigned to the attendance area, a school within the attendance area that they live within.
Trustee Crosby and I worked for 2 years on the agreement with everyone. It was my understanding that there is a time limit, as President Berba Carrera says, and within that time limit, we have to accommodate so many children. Let's say 500 to keep it even, 469, like you were saying. It appears that the way things are going to play out is that it's going to be a moot point, because they're not going to get enough kids within that time frame. And we can also, is it from the time the school opens, time it's ready to open, the time of conveyance, when does the clock start, those sorts of things. I would, until we have any further knowledge, I would keep proceeding, saying that we would have to keep, let's say 500 spaces. If it's a 1,200 capacity, I think it was 1,100 is what we had discussed before, but let's say it's 1,200, that would still be 700 kids. So it's not
Right.
really going to play against us. Where it could play against us is 6-7 years down the road, when that development's at full capacity and they are generating 1,000 kids. Then we would be back to the homeschool kids, the home attendance area, get to displace the program that we put there. Discussion for another day.
Thank you so much for that clarification.
That's okay.
And so that's the only, I guess, drawback, or that we really have to look at and consider is, if we do put a program there, will it have the ability to have longevity for those K1s? And if we don't, what do we end up doing with it? And so that's a whole nother discussion. But for the sake of us, it is posing an opportunity that we should consider, since both programs have the ability to grow to more than 500 students. That would be ideal to have them consolidated in one location. And so, but the logistics of transportation, looking at, you know, neighborhood kids versus kids who are being, you know, transferred in. I believe one of the other things that we talked about was the ability of staff and having accessibility to get to and from that particular location. That was brought up as being potentially an issue. And just, you know, looking at it as, hey, this is a prime spot, and you know, we have the ability to look at either program and which program would be accommodated quickly and the longest if we decided to use that site for an immersion program. So those are kinds of the questions we've been sort of mulling around with.
Kelly, when you bring back kind of the multi-year projection, I'm wondering, so you had said 85 students, is that a projection for that would be next year? There would
Yes.
be 80, okay.
That
And
is
so,
85 September of 2021.
okay, got it. And we're not obligated to open the school next year. Is that
Not
correct?
necessarily.
Okay.
Not
So I
necessarily.
think for facilities, I had a couple things. One, if there was a multi-year that you have, and we know those can be unreliable, but something that shows what that home development area, the number of the home attendance area for Bringhurst looks like over the next few years. And then secondly, just kind of there's a fiscal break-even point. When would FUSD feel like they need to open another school? And for this group, is there, you know, does it cost approximately $1 million to just for, we've got to have a principal, we've got to have secretarial staff, we've got to have a, you know, it's going to, and that doesn't even mean teachers, because that might
Right.
not be increased enrollment, but what
Right.
would that fiscal cost be, so that we can kind of see when the district thought, because I think we thought, many of us a few years ago, we were going to have to open another elementary school like pretty quick. But now, since our projections for enrollment were off, how comfortable is FUSD waiting another few years to open? Or when were we going to when was going to be kind of that marker for we should open another elementary school anyway?
Sure. Trustee Sweeney, if you could just verify for me, I think board gave us direction that our minimum is like 295 students for us to even think about opening a school. But
Correct. As President Berba Herrera said, there's all these costs, but there's also heating, there's insurance, there's all kinds
Yeah.
of hidden costs. So I think $1 million is probably a good number to use. So
Okay.
The board, whatever, would have to decide at what point does it make sense to put $1 million. Should we put $1 million to house 300 children when we could house them at other places in a financial crunch? But on the
Sure.
other hand, and I'm just posing the questions, I'm not taking a side on it at all. This was, you know, I don't know if you're aware, but the developers donated the site, and they donated the building, and the school district put in another $10 million to increase capacity. So they had it for about 750, and we increased the capacity to about 1,100 with that 10 million. And and there's also, and you would know more about this, the rebate from the state. If we're going to get the bond rebate, we get the first $10 million back. But because that's hung up now, I don't know if the school has to actually be in capacity, or can it be constructed and not used and still get a rebate? I don't know.
that is something that we're evaluating right now.
Right.
And it is something that is on my radar for us to, you know, pay attention to, because I know that we do have penalties when we have vacant properties that are vacant past a certain period of time, that
Right.
we end up having to pay a penalty to the state for not having facilities that are open, and, you know, tax benefits and all the things. that
Exactly.
we incur.
If the bonds were available, it would behoove us to open it to get that $10 million.
Yeah.
That'd be a no-brainer. But as you know, and as just for the people in this audience, the rules change all the time. The rules change by the people who are in power, meaning LA, San Diego, San Bernardino, the large school districts control the flow. So
Right.
we just have to keep doing what we have to do, and using our consultants and people like you, Kelly, to best position ourselves to not lose any money.
And just as a historical anecdote, I recall the Marshall site, and I know things have changed. There was either a $2.4 or $2.8 million starter budget designated to the school. So I would imagine that would be similar to the true cost of opening up Bringhurst.
But the Marshall site also included some physical renovations to the facility, which would
Oh.
not be the case in.
Okay, that's good to know.
I see a hand raised.
Yeah, I just, oh, sorry, am I on mute? Oh, yes, this is Patty. I do remember Bringhurst being a very heavy topic of conversation on the previous task force for Spanish. And one of the things that held us back was this clarification of the minimum threshold 275, which I guess now is 295. But like Victoria said, I'm interested to see this, the housing density projections for the neighborhood area at Bringhurst for the next 3 to 5 years. Just as a logistical comparison with what we have for SDI at 3 schools and the projected growth for those 3 programs.
And if I can just jump in with one point so that you guys can put it in your 10-year projection, the city is already in talks with a new general plan that the Association of Bay Area Governments is assigning Fremont, as of the last city council meeting, an additional 14,000 units over the next 15 years. Just food for thought, that because now an unelected body is telling us what we have to do as far as growth. Whether agree or disagree, just so we all are aware of what we're up against.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot of houses.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of bodies, for sure. Okay. Well, are there any questions that you all have about Bringhurst that I haven't already addressed?
Just in terms of just translating, Bringhurst is now in play for one of our programs potentially to house the entire program.
It's on the table for discussion.
Okay, and so following that, then does that then of the Azaveda, Blakeow, Grimmer, does that then potentially allow for any one of the, and I just threw Azaveda in there, but probably realistically not, does that then potentially allow one of the programs to be housed entirely in one of those schools, whatever ends up, like when we do the rebalancing and
Yes.
Sure, it does provide the opportunity for either program to have a discussion, to have us look and see what that actually looks like.
Okay.
Kelly, can I ask a question? This is Sharon.
Sure.
What I want to understand for sure, how many years would, if we placed a program at Lila Bringhurst, at this point in time, let's say that they reached their total of enrollment and students over, was it a 5-year period, a 6-year period?
I believe it's a 5-year.
Okay, so whatever program, if we did decide to open there, it would not be a long-term solution.
It could be a long-term solution if the program had not anticipated growing beyond the amount of students that the district would have set aside, separate from the neighborhood school kids that come from the development. And that magic number is somewhere around 600 to 700.
Right, 6 to 7. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's an opportunity to actually have it there and still
Right.
have room, but
Right.
it's just us figuring out and deciding, what we want to do. The other thing that you all have to be aware of as well is that myself, along with instruction and student services, we're currently looking at, I call it the projected load on the facility side for 5 years, but they're also looking, and we're trying to do a district-wide sweep to see, based on the demographic report that we received, where are we really going to have impacts, and where are we going to have kind of ebbs and flows based on, one, what's going on right now in the marketplace and people leaving Fremont and, being able to stay and work here. What does our enrollment really look like for 21-22? Because from what I understand, we're starting to see sort of the impacts of COVID now for our fall term. And if we anticipate seeing that, how we project it forward and looking at I call them our assets, which is our facilities, how we're going to use them and how we can accommodate, those changes along with the growth long term. So it's not that we're not talking about it, but we are, but it's just many little pots of conversations going on. Yes.
So just to go back to the statement you made right before on in terms of the 5-year lifespan, potentially is a capacity for the neighborhood attendance area for Bringhurst to be around 600, you said. So assuming SDI stays at the potential of roughly 600, that pretty much in combination with the attendance area for Bringhurst keeps us at 1,200 capacity.
Correct.
So at some point it can continue to be a school with SDI in attendance area.
Correct.
Kids with that trajectory.
Correct.
Okay.
It definitely has the ability to be an SDI program and English speaking only.
Right. Because one of the other things that we talked about before was the potential decrease in enrollment in SDI because of the location, and evaluating that from a lot of the kids, for example, at Vallejo Mill being within walking distance to Vallejo Mill, and then now having to drive across town.
Well, one of the things that we've talked about too is looking at transportation and providing options for transportation. And that's something that we're looking at building in our budget, if that is something that SDI chooses to do. And so that is, I wouldn't use that as a detractor, because there are tools and options available for us to accommodate that would not disrupt programming. So
okay, good to know. Thank you.
All righty. Next on our agenda, I'm just gonna scooch here, and thank you guys for being so patient. We just always get into these really awesome conversations that take up our time. So the next slide that we have that I'm going to share with you guys is the Blake Allen Grimmer English only enrollment. And excuse me. And this was very interesting because I never knew that there was these different sort of pots of students. So it was very helpful to me to be able to learn and understand how you all evaluate this information. So let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys. And I'm going to go ahead and present. So here are our English only enrollment numbers at Blake Owl. And Sarah, do you want to walk through this? Because
Sure.
I understand it, but I don't totally understand it because I didn't make it.
Sure. So these are the number of English only classrooms and the students in the classes without the SDI program. So there's currently one TK class that is regardless of the enrollment, that's a district program. Not all schools have a TK. For kindergarten, there are 2 kindergarten classes with 47 students. The potential capacity there would be 45. The Blakeout, so of the 47 students in attendance there, 45 are neighborhood students. 2 have been overloaded into the program. And there are currently 2 classrooms being used for kindergarten. So for first grade, it's 43 students, 2 classes. The potential capacity if each were filled to the 28 would be 56. There are 43 from the Blakeout attendance area and 1 overloaded with 2 classrooms being used. Where I learned something is when we get down to SDC, you can see through second, third, and fourth grade and fifth grade, there is 1 classroom that's exclusively second, third, fourth, and fifth grade, and then there is a combo class. So if you look, the way that I did the math here was that if those were filled to capacity, they would be filled to, meaning that the number of whichever grade level isn't at the 15 or 14 is, if those were filled completely, this is what it would be. And then you can see in grades 2 through 5 how many students are Blakeout attendance area and overloaded. And then for the SDC classes, most of them, and Judy and Carol, you could correct me, I guess, are not just exclusively kindergarten, first, second, third, or fourth, but they're K1, 2, 3, 4, 5
Correct.
Correct.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, so there are 38 students, and there are 4 SDC classes and 1 resource classroom at Blakeout. And then the way that they're filled is preschool through grade 3 are filled to 10, and grades 4 through 12 are up to 12, and that's from our collective bargaining agreement. And then there are, for the teachers, the teacher contract. And then the number of prep classrooms being used currently at Blakeout are 1 for PE, music, computer lab, and science. So 21 of 34 available instructional spaces are being used for classes right now.
Okay. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this particular side? And we'll go to the second one.
It is making me wonder, Kelly, so at Blaco, 6th grade English only has been moved to Walters Middle School, but is the 6th grade Spanish dual immersion still taking place at Blaco?
Yes.
That I don't know.
Yes.
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 Okay, and then Grimmer feeds into Horner. Is the 6th grade Spanish dual immersion at Grimmer still, or has that moved to Horner? I know that,
No, it's still at Grimmer.
okay. I'm just wondering, I know, which totally makes sense, why you explained you didn't do the secondary. I'm just wondering if then, especially for reunification purposes, if talking about 6th grade and continuing junior at a junior high for Spanish dual immersion, it actually could save 6th grade classrooms that are at elementary, which it might be easier to actually find a strand at a middle school upcoming where that could transition to.
I think the purpose of not doing that, at least, I mean, we want them all to go at the same time, but also Hopkins is where the 7th and 8th grade is. And so the 6th grade, I'm not sure that they're going to have the capacity to take the 6th grade at that school because they're running out of space also.
Right. I think we said, Judy, that we have to transition out of Hopkins.
Yeah.
So that's actually why I'm bringing it up, is if at what point we start it where it will have space long term. And I imagine that would be transitioning out, not shuffling everyone from Hopkins somewhere else.
Unless something changed, because I was on the junior high task force for both SDI and MIP. And I want to make very clear about this. Sarah, I think you were on the team already at that point. Without expanding MIP, all 3 strands of Spanish and all 2 strands of MIP, including 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, were all accounted for in the numbers when we did the assumptions.
Okay.
If it changed because of budget or teachers or whatever, I don't know. But I just want to make sure that that was actually codified.
For the existing
Clarification.
student, right?
For
For the existing student.
The existing 3 strands of Spanish at the 3 schools, and for the existing 2 strands of MIP at Azaveda, we accounted for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade projection. That's why I keep going back to it in this conversation. I just want to make sure that we know what the maximum potential for both programs is as we think about spaces. So if we're talking about Hopkins, the only impact, and again, I don't know what happens in the 3 or 4 years since the decision, but in terms of the only impact, when the current kindergartners of MIP at Azaveda hit either 6th or 7th grade, depending on whenever Hopkins finally converts, that's the only real impact at that time. And I know we've talked about this, but I just want to make sure that we had those assumptions when we did this.
Well, I think that the difference, as Kelly talked about in the last meeting, is that with the middle school conversion at Hopkins, they are at their capacities in terms of facilities and adding any buildings. And so once you add the 6th grade to Hopkins, there's no room to have the neighborhood 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and then to have the immersion students there because of the middle school conversion and because basically Hopkins is landlocked. There's nowhere else to build. They've maximized their ability to build beyond to accommodation of the 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in the neighborhood.
Yeah, no, I understand that these are all always estimates. I'm just saying at the time we made that decision,
Sure.
all that growth was accounted for with the existing.
Right. Yeah, and so then now with the middle school conversion,
No,
that,
that included
Yeah.
middle school, Sarah. I mean, we brought it up. That was including the middle
Well, you
school.
know what? I have a meeting with Corey on Thursday, and this is something I'll verify with him because we've been having very in-depth conversations about his loading based on, some of the things that we're doing with his facility. So I will verify that and
And I'll
make
look
sure that
I might still
that
have
is
the
true.
minutes from those meetings, so I'll check those as well. Because this was a 2.5-year process.
And
Sure.
we do have
Well-
previous minutes, and we do have notes from this process, Keith, that says that as of 2023, we won't have room for the reason that Sarah noted. So it is good that you're bringing it up again so that Kelly can verify, so that we know for sure what time frame we're on.
Right.
No, it's fine to reset. I'm just saying that was the historical decision making.
Sure. No, and this is very helpful for me because my world is very fluid in terms of how we sort of respond to different changes. And so it's helpful to me to understand what our starting point was from. And if there has been changes from when you all made that decision to where we are now, I can kind of backtrack and figure out where that change occurred and figure out if there's a way to either reset and go back to what you originally wanted or to try and help find solutions to solve the problem. So this is very helpful to me.
Yeah, no, I think it's great to be proactive because we're going to have to communicate this as a parent group, right?
Mhm.
And that's where the fun begins, and that's fine.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, let's look at the second slide. And here's our grammar English only. And Sarah, if you could be kind enough to walk us through this one as well.
Sure, so it's similar. And Judy can obviously chime in. Jose's not here to talk about Blackout, but Judy can certainly talk about Grimmer. So they currently have a preschool classroom on the campus. There are 2 kindergarten classes. Grimmer is interesting in that 23 kindergarten students are overloaded to Grimmer, and 24 are our neighborhood students. And then for first grade, there are 37 Grimmer attendance area students with 4 overloaded. They have also 2 classes. Second grade has 2 classes with 40 neighborhood students and 7 overloaded. And then you can read across as you see. And then with the SDC, they have 4 classes of SDC, 1 resource classroom. Again, it shows the loading is not all the way up to what a normal class size would be because there's students with special needs. And so there are currently 5 classrooms being used there. And then for prep, they have a computer lab and a science lab. And they have a couple of other classes, but they're really not sufficient to hold a full class size. They're like about a half size. So they're really more office use. So 19 of 28 classes are currently being used at the Grimmer campus for the English only program. And the one thing I wasn't able to break out working with student support service, one thing I can say is that none of the students reflected in K-5 are students in receiving special services. They're not students with IEPs. But
I also want to make, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear that.
So the numbers that I got from student support services are from for kindergarten through 5th grade, the students that are overloaded are not students that have an IEP.
Correct.
But there are students in SDC classes.
Yeah, they're not considered overloads, however.
Right, they're not. But I just wanted to, I asked the question, so because I asked it and I was interested, I thought somebody else might also be wonder if the students that were in the overload numbers in Illuminate also included SDC classes. They do not. That is a district program. It's more of an administrative placement, not an overload.
And I wanted to point out something here because it looks like I have 9 classrooms available, but I do not. I have 2 classrooms. I actually only have 1 empty classroom right now. There could potentially be 2 because we have each kindergarten, English only kindergarten in a separate classroom. They could share a classroom. The spaces that are counted here in the 28 are not big enough to house a full classroom. So I want to make that clear. And I have a feeling that Blakeo is the same.
Okay.
So that is misleading.
Thanks for that clarification, Judy.
So these don't include the SDI classes though. So you have 6 of, so it would be 6 of those, right?
Right. So take 7 of those out because we have 6th grade.
Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
It's still, so
It is misleading.
so
Yes.
it's 1.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. All right, well, I'm going to exit out of this and stop sharing my screen. Were there any other questions on the English only slides that we reviewed and any other discussions that we want to have on this?
No, I would just propose that when we pause here and come back to pick up with the last agenda item once you have kind of the data points that the task force has recommended, just due to the
I
time.
agree. That was one of the things I wanted to ask you guys. Can we go ahead and table the possible recommendations and just kind of digest what we have reviewed today, and then look at when I come back with the additional data that you guys asked for? I think we'll be able to have a much more relevant conversation of what the real options are based on the numbers that we come back with. And as far as I'm going to ask the city for the housing density stuff. I can't guarantee that I'll get it back from them in time for our meeting, but they're super slow. But once they do give it to us, it's pretty comprehensive. But the other thing that I think that it's important for you all to know is that we had the housing projections when we initially, of course, went into building Lila Bringhurst with them. And they have failed on every count in every step of the way in terms of what they have promised. And, so I don't want us to look at those numbers and put a lot of kind of weight on it, because they're great at looking at, oh, this is wonderful, great opportunity, it's a great sales pitch. But in reality, when we look at the historical information from the city, it shows a totally different picture. So I just wanted to put that out there and say that, I'll get it, but I don't want us to base our decision on what we think they're going to do, but really just look at what we currently have the ability to do for ourselves and with what our resources are. So, well, that's all I have. And then I think the next thing is just confirming our next meeting time. I believe it is December 14th. And are there any other topics or questions or anything you guys wanted to add to our agenda for our next meeting? Well, with that, I'm going to say no. I'm going to take that as a resounding no, that you guys are pretty solid on what we've already put together. I'll keep I think for our next meeting, we're going to go ahead and look at the low enrolled schools again, and with the breakout of some of the data points that we had wanted to drill down to. Also clarification, I'll get the Bringhurst information on the development and what our limitations are with our conveyance agreement with them. And then the homeschool enrollment information I will get for the top 5 schools that were low enrolled, so we can really see what the homeschool kids versus those that are, I forgot the word, I'm drawing a blank. You guys know what I'm talking about. The kids that are brought into another school, the overload school, the overload numbers. And then look at, what's my other point? And then looking at the multi-year all-in-one spreadsheet that has the breakdowns that we talked about earlier. So with that, are there any other things that I may not have covered and that you guys want us to have an opportunity to discuss next meeting? Nope. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting. And I thank you guys so much for your time this evening and your commitment to making this program work. And thank you for my education, because I'm learning along the way as we go through this process. So this is really fun and very nice to see everybody. So, and if I don't see everyone, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Stay safe, stay well, enjoy your families, and get some rest on those 3 days that we have off next week. All right.
Everybody have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care,
you,
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.